It started with the Tri-State Freethinkers, which I co-founded. We heard about the Ark Encounter. As we started to look into it, we found out they were receiving up to $18 million in state money, all while maintaining their discriminatory hiring practices. And it's also anti-science. So when we start looking into each one of these, we got very involved with the Ark. If you listen to Ken Ham, he chooses his words carefully. What he says is this: we received no money to build this Ark. His money is coming in arrears. With the sales tax, he's going to receive a refund each year of up to $18 million over the next 10 years from the state of Kentucky. In addition, employees and surrounding employees, not just of the Ark, have to pay 2% of their paycheck, which goes to pay back the $65 million junk bond loan that they took out from the city. In addition to that, 75% of the real estate tax goes to pay back the junk bonds, not to the county and state. So what's interesting is, when they are talking to certain people, they claim to be a church. At other times, they claim to be a for-profit business. For example, when they're talking with the state of Kentucky for the $18 million, they say, we're a for-profit company. We're eligible for these things. We're not a church. When they didn't want to pay the safety fee that the city of Williamstown was assessing, they said, we are a church. We are exempt from these fees. In order to avoid taxes, they've transferred part of it, which was in an LLC, to a nonprofit for $10 to avoid taxes. But in doing so, they were going to lose their $18 million. So then they transferred it back for another $10 to avoid that. It is a shell game. And the way he set this up is, the entrance gate is a for-profit company, but the actual boat, the Ark itself, is a nonprofit company, which can receive donations and discriminatory hiring practices. In any other state, this wouldn't have happened. It was a clear violation of separation of church and state. Ken Ham promised this would be a destination where he talked that sometimes 2.5, 3 million people would come, and it would create all these jobs for the locals. They didn't even hit 1 million people. There are quite a few people coming, but not near the numbers that he promised. Also, most of the locals can't qualify for the jobs there, because you have to sign that statement of faith saying the earth is only 6,000 years old. You can't be LGBT. You can't be Catholic. You can't be atheist. They discriminated against so many people, they had to bring in outside people for a lot of these positions. The Creation Museum every year had double-digit decreases in attendance every year since it opened, until the Ark. The Ark's going to give it a big boost. But Ken Ham said he would have 2.5, 3 million people. He had less than 1 million. He's predicting next year he'll double his attendance that he did last year. That's utterly ridiculous. Their target is children. They want to tell children the earth is only 6,000 years old, that God created the earth literally in 7 days, and that Answers in Genesis is telling people Genesis is true in all formats. And it's scary when you go in there, parents are bringing their children through, telling them these things, through the Creation Museum, through the Ark Encounter, that Bill Nye said it best, we're raising a generation of scientific, illiterate children. The biggest thing, American atheists, we don't want religious exemptions. We want everybody to be treated equally, all nonprofits or all people. And Ken Ham in Answers in Genesis is looking for all these religious exemptions and trying to also get benefits as being for profit. They're double dipping it, taking it both ways. And that's why, through the Tri-State Freethinkers and American Atheists, we protested the Ark Encounter on their grand opening, and also on their 1-year anniversary, which we decided to make an annual event. Because what we found is this: while there was many people writing about the Ark before us and giving a lot of information, the majority of the pieces were still kind of fluff pieces in the base media. The atheist news was killing it, but the general media was very positive. Once we labeled this thing and launched the campaign Genocide and Incest Park, it made international news and everybody was talking about it. It got everybody's attention. But the neat thing is, as I'm talking to Fox and Friends Live, I wasn't talking about Genocide and Incest Park. I was talking about the state tax incentives, the anti-discrimination, the anti-science. We got all of our talking points. We tracked it after that. The majority of all the stories were negative. Even the Christian papers were reporting what we were doing. But what we noticed is, and that was only a one-shot thing, we thought initially. But as we got further and further away from that opening day, we started to see the media going back to those fluff pieces of, they're bringing in almost 1 million people, they're doing these things. And it was more and more media being positive, and we were like, we need to bring this back again. And we need to put it on the national stage of getting people's attention. And we were able to do that once again of getting people to talk. And then you had local papers like the Lexington Herald reporting, almost on a daily basis of the negative of the Ark, and all these things start rolling down. And we start getting violations from schools. Local school districts start reporting violations of 14 pages of violations we were getting reported all over the county and parts of the state. And we were able to get every single one of those removed. And that was because we stood up and said, hey, enough. Here's the misconception. A lot of people think the Ark Encounter is not making any money. A lot of people think the Ark Encounter is going to go bankrupt. It's vacant. I don't think so. The Ark Encounter, if you do simple math, is probably generated over $30 million in its first year. That's just on ticket sales, not counting merchandising, everything else. And with all the tax deductions they get, all the rebates, the tax deductions, they didn't finance this $100 million project with much of their own money. So financially, they're doing fine. They're doing fine, but that doesn't translate to the schools, to the city, the county, state. The city is on the verge of bankruptcy. The county is on the verge of bankruptcy. The Ark Encounter is only helping itself and no one else. But we shouldn't lie to ourselves. It's most likely still going to be there for years and years. Keep the pressure on public opinion. We let people know that this isn't a family fun day. I mean, think about this. They built an entire theme park based on a story of genocide and where God repopulated the earth through incest for the second time. While they have the right to do this, this doesn't sound like a family fun day. Like, who thought this was a good idea? And, we must mock it. We must make fun of it. We also must be informative and educate people what's actually inside these things. We must call people to get out and vote. Originally, it was opposed. We weren't going to give the 18 million incentives. But Kentucky turned out one of its lowest voting ever. And a governor came in and said, replaced the transportation cabinet overnight and said, no, I'm fine with it. Let's run with it. I'm glad we're a Christian state. I'm paraphrasing, but he basically just the other day said, we're glad we're a Christian state where we can be openly Christians. We don't have to hide like sheep. So by putting pressure on them, we need to get out and vote to put politicians that will honor the separation church and state.
Hello and welcome to the 5th annual Ark Encounter protest. We wanted to play that video. Seth Andrews was kind enough to make that a few years back so that people who haven't been tracking us and people who don't know about the Ark Encounter protest can kind of get a little bit of history. So I want to start out by saying thank you, Seth Andrews, for that video. It's fantastic. We've got some amazing speakers here today, so thank you for joining. I know we're digital this year, but we're hoping to see people live next year. We're just happy to be doing this for now. But before we dive into our speakers, we have a few board members who are live on location at the Ark Encounter. So with me today, I have David Brenner. David, how are you?
Hey, Eric, how are you?
Doing well.
It's a great day out here.
Good, good. It's beautiful out there, man.
It is. Just enough clouds to keep it cool.
Good, man. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, I mean, we want to thank everybody that's been behind the scenes to get this up and running. And thank you very much for emceeing this year. The COVID-19 crisis has really thrown us for a loop, and doing the first virtual protest has been great. And we couldn't have done it without you.
We're absolutely happy to. We just in the process of reaching out and talking to the different speakers who are going to be talking today. It's been wonderful, the support and the progression. I mean, this is the 5th year that this protest has been going on, and I love this. I know y'all are making sure that you're safe and that you don't have a large group there, but you're making your presence known and you're saying, hey, we're not letting this go. We're going to continue this protest because it's worth doing. So I'm incredibly grateful that you're there doing it. Let's see, is there anything else about the board or anything you want to say before we move into our speeches?
Yeah, I mean, really, we just want to say, you know, we are not out here because of the what Ken and the Ark believe. We aren't out here attacking their religious beliefs. We're here because they're taking government money for clearly religious purposes, and that's really what it boils down to. You know, it's not even because Ken hates SpongeBob for some reason. I don't know. But you know, we just had reporting that they took $1 to $2 million of the payroll protection money, and that's a huge issue. You know, we think that the Ark itself is an early sign that, you know, of the scientific illiteracy, as Jim alluded to, and that's specifically why we're having a problem getting people to comply with the mask and social distancing orders. It's the distrust in science that's rampant, and we need to fix that. So back to you, Eric. I can't wait to hear the rest of our speakers.
Sounds good. Thank you so much for being there, man. Okay, so with that said, I can't believe we have people there live, and we have so many speakers that are going to be presenting live. I'm just excited, so I don't want to prattle on too much more. I do want to say that our very first speaker today is the founder and president of Black Non-Believers. Her name is Mandisa Thomas, and I have had the pleasure to get to know her over the last couple of years, and she is an incredible asset to this community. So I am proud to announce our first speaker, Mandisa Thomas.
Hi, I'm Mandisa Thomas, founder and president of Black Non-Believers Incorporated, which is headquartered in the Atlanta, Georgia area. It is an honor to join you today for the annual Ark Encounter protest hosted by the Tri-State Freethinkers. We are only halfway through 2020, yet we still have a long fight ahead of us. In the midst of a global health pandemic, we are facing an even bigger and, dare I say, longer-lasting crisis. That of religion, Christianity in particular, and how it continues to infect and invade our lives every day. The Ark Encounter is but a huge monument to the oppression of millions. It is anti-humanity with its basis in falsehoods, discrimination particularly against women and LGBTQ folks, all while receiving government assistance at the taxpayer's expense. It must end. The heart of the work of Black Non-Believers, my organization, is resistance. Resistance against religious privilege, which in addition to violating church and state separation, is at the root of racial and systemic injustice. And if we have learned nothing else this year, it is how this country still has a blatant disregard for human life, but especially Black lives. The murders of Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, and countless others at the hands of law enforcement and former law enforcement are all too horrifically familiar to us. They are now part of a long and ugly history of racism and white supremacy, which is upheld by Christianity. And much like the bailouts that many churches have received during the COVID-19 pandemic, there is practically no accountability. And far too often, we have been told to pray, yet we remain the prey. If I sound exasperated, it is because I am. It is because I am tired. We are tired. Our community has been fighting this fight for far too long. Black lives have always mattered to us. And guess what? We should also matter to you. Because what impacts our communities also affects you. Now is a time to not only speak up against these injustices, it is also time to do something. This is the year that we can truly make a difference. The protests against police brutality, the Ark Encounter, and against religious tyranny are all very important. But in this year, this crucial election year, we must show up and show out at the polls to make sure that our government is working for the people. It is also particularly important to strengthen our communities and with love. We still need each other. Our families and children need us, and we need to nurture them so that they can make a better future for generations to come. This year has been tough, but we must remain vigilant. We must stay committed to the causes and fight for what we know is right. Our lives are at stake, and this is how we will win. For more information on Black nonbelievers and to show your support, please visit our website at blacknonbelievers.org. Also, please show your support for your local secular groups as well as the national organizations. We all need you. Thank you once again for being here today. It is an honor to join you. Please stay safe while remaining focused, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the presentations. Have a good day.
Mandisa, thank you so much. That's fantastic. And that link can be found in the video description, as well as links to all of our various speakers. Please definitely consider supporting and check out Black Nonbelievers, because it is absolutely important. It's integral that we're there for each other. Mandisa, thank you. Our next speaker is the author of Foundational Falsehoods of Creationism. My first times meeting them and seeing them has been continuously on stage, fighting local, state, and nationally when it comes to education and when it comes to information on, well, exactly what we're here talking about today. This idea of creationism versus what we clearly see as evolution. It's my honor to introduce to you our next speaker, Aaron Ra.
Thank you very much, Eric. Why are we protesting something that we don't even believe in? I'm defending what I do believe in. I believe in truth. I believe that lying to people is wrong because people base their decisions on the information they have. If you give them bad information, they're going to make stupid decisions, like donating $100 million to build a boat-shaped museum dedicated to a delusion in which everyone, everywhere, every baby deer, every puppy on every continent had to drown because the wisest and most powerful being imaginable was pissed off at some little Middle Eastern tribe that he could have gotten rid of much more efficiently and neatly some other way, or because he's supposed to be an omniscient telepath who allegedly loves his children like a deadbeat dad who left for cigarettes and never came back. He should know how to set us straight a whole lot easier and better than having to kill everyone with his incompetence and lack of foresight. So say the sacred fables, written by nobody knows who, and they didn't know what they were talking about, whoever they were. Those fractured fairy tales assure us that God fucked up again, and that he had to wipe the slate clean, as if he didn't know in advance that would happen. Yet he had no better plan than that. Obviously, this story is completely bogus and impossible. We know for certain there was never a global flood of Noah's Ark. It's not just that it couldn't happen, but that even if it could happen, we still know and can prove that it didn't happen. This boat-shaped facade is just that, a lie. I became an anti-theist activist when a group of fundamentalists bragged to me about how their congregation had all voted together as a block exactly as their preacher told them to, which is illegal and unconstitutional. The reason churches don't have to pay taxes is because they're not allowed to lobby for political candidates, though they do that anyway because they're headed by greedy, immoral, unethical, criminally corrupt, lying frauds and charlatans. It wasn't just that one congregation. It was a nationwide coalition of religious right megachurches, their pastors all in collusion to position Christian nationalists at every level of state and federal government, which is why our country is in such shit now. Their agenda was explained in a memo that was accidentally leaked to the outside world. It was a wedge strategy to first put evangelical Christians into as many government positions as possible, then to undermine public education, specifically by forcing religious beliefs into science, sex, and social studies classrooms, to teach abstinence only, creating a positive feedback loop, causing more children to have children, increasing the poverty rate of uneducated mothers, to undermine science education entirely, denying both anthropogenic climate change because the GOP is owned and controlled by the fossil fuel industry, and of course to reject evolution specifically and scientific methodology in general so as to mislead and deceive students into believing supernatural nonsense instead. Then, instill the notion of American exceptionalism, which is the myth that our government and our legal system were based on a covenant between God and Moses. And it doesn't matter how much evidence expert historians present to disprove that. Someone explained American exceptionalism as at one of these school board meetings by saying that the United States of America must always be seen as a shining beacon of what it means to be God-blessed. So students are still taught that the U.S. never did anything wrong, as if the Civil War was just a matter of states' rights, as if slavery either never happened or the slaves were merely immigrant workers, or, as some Christian textbooks actually teach, that slavery is biblically justified and should be reinstated. Those fundamentalists were not just end times dominionists. That would be bad enough. I mean, why would you elect someone to look out for your future when they don't believe that you have one? Because any minute now, Jesus is going to come back and save us from ourselves and our disastrous decisions. Communionists believe that Christians should dominate and subjugate everyone else. Islam has a version of this too, albeit by a different name, and both say that heresy and apostasy should be capital crimes punishable by death, along with other so-called abominations like homosexuality. As some Christian textbooks even advocate the genocide of indigenous people if they don't accept Jesus. Dominionists want to take over the federal government, overturn our democratic constitutional republic, and establish a theocracy enforcing God's law. The group I was talking to were Reconstructionists following R.J. Rushdoony of the Chalcedon Institute. He was bent on using American religious police to enforce Levitical law, which is every bit as bad and in some ways even worse than Sharia law. Imagine facing a death sentence just for working on weekends. These people bragged about how many senators had already come from the Chalcedon Institute, that they confessed their fiendish plan like the villain in a spy movie, as if they were sure that it was already too late to stop it. I had to do something. I knew that the first line of attack was against science education, specifically evolution, and I knew that most people don't know anything about that because most teachers can't or won't teach it properly. Because to understand any aspect of science requires an investment of time, effort, and money in higher education in a relevant field. And then you have to be smart enough to understand everything, and most folks just can't do all that. They're not that bright. That's one reason why there are so many young people in churches, more than there are in college. So I decided to make this information easily accessible and comprehensible to those without an academic background or prior knowledge, with not a lot of time for in-depth study, but maybe an interest in finding out what is really true. That's why I made my series on the foundational falsehoods of creationism, because creationism is based entirely on frauds, falsehoods, and fallacies. The frauds of creationism include, believe it or not, the Loch Ness Monster hoax, the fabricated footprints of the Paluxy River, and everything Ron Wyatt claimed to discover, including Jesus' still living blood dripping from the remains of his cross into a secret underground chamber and onto the Ark of the Covenant. Wyatt also claimed to have found Noah's Ark, but that turned out to be a vaguely canoe-shaped pile of dirt. They felt the falsehoods of creationism, like that there are no transitional species or beneficial mutations, that macroevolution has never been confirmed, or that it isn't what it is, and that evolution is just a theory, not a fact. A few of the falsehoods in my list were based on logical fallacies, like the fallacy of projection, where believers try to project their own faults onto those who will not share them, when they accuse us of doing what they're actually doing, but that we're not doing. It's what I call the pot calling the silverware black. They're also desperate to create the illusion of false equivalence, as if you're just as bad as I am, or I'm just as good as you are. That's when we hear that their belief is based on evidence that they can never produce, or that science is a faith-based belief. So not only do we need to have faith in not faith, But a lack of belief is also a belief, and a lack of religion is a religion, and they tell us that rationality is irrational. Whatever criticism reasonable people apply to unreasonable believers, they just parrot back at us and accuse us of whatever they're doing. For example, a couple years after my series on creation called out creationism as a lie, Ken Ham wrote a book with nothing on the cover but the word lie, L-I-E, written in large bold letters. Now, I haven't read it because his book is smaller than mine, with only half as many pages and a lower rating with only 4 reviews to my 187, and his pathetic pamphlet will set you back $230. So judging that book by its cover, I guess that Ken Ham's book Lie must be his advice to fellow creationists. How do you establish, promote, and defend pseudoscience apologetics organizations? Lie. That's how Ham did it. Same goes for Hovind, Comfort, Gish, Morris, and the whole troop of reality-denying pseudoscientists. But it turns out that he's saying that evolution and millions of years is a lie. So now we're just accusing each other of lying, just like we're both accusing each other of being irrational, dogmatic, religious believers. I know you are, but what am I? Because much of the pseudoscience apologetics is simply gaslighting, that what you're seeing and what you're hearing is not what's happening. It's fake news. Gaslighting is a textbook form of manipulation used by psychopaths, sociopaths, and all those with malignant narcissistic personality disorders trying to cultivate doubt by making us question our own perception, by using persistent denial and misdirection. And that's what Answers in Genesis is all about. They are a lie factory. And it's more political than you think. Religious propagandists don't care what the truth is as long as you believe what you're told without question, without reservation, and without reason, so that they can manipulate your physical and financial support and control how you vote. Unfortunately, if you're one of the few who cares what is really true, it is easy enough to prove which side has all the facts and which side has nothing but a fantasy.
Jesus, Arn, that is fantastic. So for those of you who don't know, this is live. This is a live event. Arn, that was great. Thank you so much. So I want to dive into our next speaker and keep this rolling. Our next speaker is an incredibly busy person. He is on The Scathing Atheist, The Skeptocrat, Citation Needed, God-Awful Movies, a brand new podcast. He is also an author of Diatribes 1 and 2. I don't think he needs too much more introduction. If you haven't checked out his shows, you absolutely should. With us today is No Illusions.
Well, thank you, Eric. I'm happy to be dived into. So there are many of us in the atheist, secular, and skeptical community that have been protesting Ken Ham's Ark Park since long before it was completed. The entire time, we've been dismissed with the same basic question. What's the worst that could happen? Now, that's not the question that we get from young earth creationists. That's not the question that Ken Ham asks us. That's the secular dismissal. People who weren't fundamentalists, people who accept evolution, people who know good and damn well how old the earth is, they would dismiss our concerns and our protests and our calls to action by asking us why we care what Ken Ham believes. What does it matter to us? What business is it of ours if people want to teach their children that the earth is 6,000 years old? What's the worst that could happen? I mean, here we are, right? Or more accurately, here we aren't because we can't safely meet together outdoors to protest this thing. I mean, what's the worst that could happen if you built a theme park dedicated entirely to lying to people about science? What's the worst that could happen if you raised a generation of children to be mistrustful of scientific expertise? What's the worst that could happen if you cast doubt on the foundational principle of the entire science of biology and then made its rejection a prerequisite of your faith? What's the worst that could happen? Are these jackasses that reject the consensus of science whenever it doesn't fit their narrative, are they going to elect their own president? Are they going to populate the entire executive branch of government with Christian blowhards and bigots like Mike Pompeo, Mike Pence, and Betsy DeVos? Are they going to sideline anybody who isn't willing to set aside science to toe the official narrative? What's the worst that could happen? Would they really put somebody in charge of the Center for Disease Control, even though he's grossly unqualified, just because he opposed condom distribution in Africa on account of the sinfulness of condoms? Would they really put a pharmaceutical exec in charge of the Department of Health and Human Services just because he was anti-abortion? Would they really elevate a man all the way to the vice presidency of the country just because he passed an egregiously homophobic law that benefited their bigotry? And then ostensibly put that very same guy in charge of the federal response to a global pandemic, despite the fact that his only relevant experience in that field was overseeing one of the most mismanaged AIDS outbreaks in American history. Would they really do that? What's the worst that could happen? Would the seeds of doubt that they sowed actually blossom into people who refuse to follow public safety protocols just because those protocols were recommended by scientists? Would they really stick to this bullshit, demonstrably false narrative if it meant endangering their own lives and the lives of their families and their communities? Hell, they used the same question when we protested all these constitutionally dubious tax breaks that Jim was talking about, the ones that the state of Kentucky and that the city and the county offered along the way. They said, what's the worst that could happen? Are we going to suddenly wake up a couple years from now and find that our federal tax dollars are subsidizing religious schools, rebuilding churches, and paying the salary of clergy? Over and over again, we would hear that same question, but it's funny. Nobody seems to ask it anymore. It just dropped off the page all of a sudden. I mean, don't get me wrong. I am glad to see that people are finally coming around to understanding why it might be dangerous to teach children to doubt the veracity of science. But I would have loved a demonstration that didn't include 130,000 new American graves and counting. Look, over the last few years, we have answered a lot of the questions that our detractors have had. You know, why does this matter? Why do you do this? Why do you get so worked up about it? Why do you care what other people believe? I think we've answered those questions definitively, or at least I hope so. We better have. Because the one question that we haven't answered, as bad as all this is what's the worst that could happen?
Wow. Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you so much. I agree with the live chat. Your diatribes are a thing of beauty, my friend. That was fantastic. Okay. So our next speaker is someone who I've gotten to know over the last year and a half. They are my co-host on Talk Heathen. They're a regular host on secular sexuality. They are starting a new channel, and they're also co-host on a new show of mine called Murphy's Law. V, I'm really glad you're here. Thank you so much. Without further ado, Vila Bianca.
I loved learning growing up. As a kid, there was no better day than when all the textbooks that we ordered from Rainbow Resources for the upcoming school year were delivered to our house in a gigantic box. The textbooks were heavy and the covers were glossy and the pages smelled fresh. It was so exciting. My mom actually had to force me to wait until our school year started because I wanted to read them all right away. And in this way, my homeschooling education served me well. I was encouraged to love learning, to read and study, to ask questions, but only to a point. Anyone raised in a Christian homeschooled environment knows the publishers of these curricula. Abeka Books, Master Books by Answers in Genesis, Christian Light Education, learning about the world from what was discreetly called a Christian perspective, a creationist perspective. The word perspective, of course, better translates to fiction. These were not, I would discover later, equally valid interpretations of objective reality. These were fabrications, falsehoods, lies, firmly believed lies by the people who told them, but lies nonetheless. And this was the downside. My education was used against me. I'm not saying it was intentional. I'm not saying that it was a plot to purposefully abuse the power that my parents had over me as a child who was being homeschooled, but it was used against me. I was miseducated. Those precious years, while my brain was still forming, soaking up new information, ready to be molded, were wasted, filled with trash I would have to later painfully wrench out and discard. And it messed me up. Realizing this felt like betrayal. What was real? What was true? How was I supposed to reconcile the fact that the people I trusted to educate me and equip me to exist in this world instead stymied that growth in a years-long game of misdirection? It's something I still deal with. I'm not recovered. So, what did I learn? What was so horrible about this perspective? I learned that the earth was 6,000 years old. I learned that it was created in 6 literal days by the Judeo-Christian God of the Bible. I learned that the first man and the first woman were created out of dirt and breath and bone and were 10 feet tall and glowed so brightly you couldn't see their bodies, which was probably a nice workaround for my parents for whom the naked thing was an issue. I learned that they lived in a garden where T-Rexes ate plants and dragonflies grew so big you could ride them. I learned that after the fall, which entailed talking to a literal snake, we got smaller and weaker. We lost our glow and had to put clothes on because we were ashamed. And the whole world was cursed. Sin, apparently as creative a force as God himself, took over and put thorns on rose bushes, made womanhood itself a curse, and condemned men to need to work for survival. And then I learned that a 600-year-old man talked to God, built a boat, filled it with every kind of animal on the planet, and then a worldwide flood killed everything because of sin. I learned that the human race was repopulated by a single family, which wasn't a problem because genes were pure back then, before sin got a hold of them, which definitely feels like eugenics looking back at it. I was taught that we would continue to degrade and the planet would continue to eat itself alive until the end of the world, when God would return, take the believers to heaven, and burn the rest. Now, that's a ridiculous and horrifying bedtime story to tell your children. That would be bad enough, but it was worse than that, because alongside these stories comes the rest of this creationist perspective, a worldview that is so horrible, so abusive, and so detrimental to anyone raised in it that I'm still recovering from the mental and emotional after effects of it to this day. I was taught that as someone born in a female body, I was personally responsible for the ruination of the planet. I held the guilt of all women in my body, and that was why my period hurt. That was why eventually, when I got married and had children myself, childbirth would be unbearably painful, and that an epidural or even an Advil was cheating, trying to weasel out of a punishment that God had justly bestowed upon me for the sins of my foremothers. Meanwhile, my dad was taught that he was the spiritual leader of the household with a direct line to God. He was justified in his abuse of the women and boys in his family because God had ordained that he dominate us. And God had ordained that we submit. It was supposed to be painful and dehumanizing to feel like punishment because it was part of the curse. Asking for it to stop, standing up for yourself, or demanding that you be treated like a human was a sign of rebellion and pride to be beaten down, literally. And there was no way to escape this abuse, except through marriage to a man who would show equal amounts of holy domination. And the horrible weight of emotional suffering didn't end there. I was taught that I was born covered in, twisted with sin. It was at once inevitable and wholly my fault. When I was a kid, I suffered with very bad OCD. It's almost gone now, but it was debilitating. There were days and weeks where I could barely function because I had internalized so completely that I was sinful and that everything I did was offensive to both my earthly and heavenly fathers. I lived in crippling anxiety that one day my entire family would be raptured without me, and I would be left to face the wrath of a God who claimed to love me more than anyone else on the planet ever could, who would once again cover the earth with fire and water in punishment for sin. My sin. This is the language of abuse, This is the language of control, and raising your child with this worldview is abuse. Miseducating your child on purpose is abuse. Restricting the information that your child needs to grow as a person is abuse. Telling your child that they are covered in sin and going to hell just for being who they are without apology is abuse. And this is why I dismiss out of hand those objections that creationists have to evolution. Don't tell my child, they say, that they're animals. What do you think my child will feel or do or think if they learn such a thing? But the alternative they offer, telling your child that they are broken, ruined, damned for eternity unless they submit to a God who punishes out of love, is far, far worse. What kind of worldview is that to bestow on a child? What will they do or feel or think if they are told these things? I am so lucky that I got out. I am so lucky that I escaped because the odds were not in my favor. Today, I am dedicated to learning about science, about history, about the beautiful, terrible, frightening, and awe-inspiring world we live in and are a part of. I'm still playing catch up, but I'm almost where I need to be. I'm getting therapy and pursuing healthy relationships. I'm taking a hard look at the anxiety, the compulsion, the panic attacks, and the fear of abandonment, that internalized guilt and shame instilled within me, and I'm gently letting it go. This is a process that I'm doing alongside so many others who have deconverted and realized that we are, in fact, good enough, just the way we are, accountable for our own actions, worthy of respect, and free to pursue knowledge wherever it leads us. We are equipping ourselves with the tools we need to survive and to thrive, and that's something I want for every child raised in this abusive worldview. We are seeing a growth of new adults leaving their religions as they are exposed to information and education online, but this is still a self-perpetuating cycle that must be stopped. It's up to us as activists, as content creators, as educators, as voting citizens, as members of school boards and committees, as parents and siblings, as members of a social species to do our part to stop it. Let's save these children from sin by telling them the truth, that sin never existed in the first place. Thank you.
Wow. V, thank you so much. Just watching the live chat during that, I've got to tell you, you are so not alone. And I'm so grateful. We are all so grateful that you made it over here. That was incredible. Thank you. Okay. So next, we have someone who's been holding Answers in Genesis's feet to the fire for years. If you haven't seen Paulogia, I highly recommend that you subscribe. They are a host of Ham and Egg News. Paulogia, well, he lives so far away that getting him out here physically has been tough, and we hope that in future years we can get him out here. And so this COVID crisis has given us the opportunity to bring in voices like Paul's, and for that I'm incredibly grateful. So our next speaker is Paulogia.
Welcome to Paulogia. We're a former Christian, indeed a former young earth creationist who recently upheld everything that Ken Ham preaches, takes a look at the claims of Christians. It was over 3 years ago that my Ham and Egg News show debuted.
Welcome to Answers News. This is February 6th, 2017. And
I think you suck.
And
Jane, you ignorant slut.
You don't frighten us, English pig dogs!
all right.
And since then, I've been covering not only the regressive social positions and unwaveringly incorrect science teachings of Answers in Genesis, but also the real economic and political harm that the Ark Encounter attraction has wrought upon Kentucky.
Now, last year, two great things happened. I became the president, and it was also the launch of Ark Encounter.
But I definitely hate watch pay attention to the Ark economics. The Arkonomics, as it were. Is that a phrase? Can that be what we call it from now on? Hashtag Arkonomics. From all the shady dealings to get the Ark Encounter built in the first place.
He went to Williamstown and basically said, I want to build it here. It'll draw in a lot of tourists. It will create all these jobs. But if you want me to build it here and spend my money in this community, more or less, you got to give me a whole bunch of tax breaks.
To the complete failure of the park to help local residents in any way. Like this article talking about how Grant County, where the Ark sits, may have to file bankruptcy. To the despicable legal shenanigans, all to avoid paying 50 cents toward the salaries of first responders responsible for his guests. You'll recall that the town in which Ken Ham's $100 million Ark Encounter attraction is located passed a 50-cent per ticket safety tax to cover the police, medical, and fire infrastructure used by the Ark. Rather than simply collect and remit this tax, Ken Ham sold the for-profit Ark to his own non-profit company for $10 and declared himself exempt. But this move was in violation of the $18 million sales tax credit from the state of Kentucky, and the state promptly cut him off, which ended up allowing the public to track how well the Ark is or isn't doing. Since taxes collected are a matter of public record, media like the Grant County News have been regularly reporting on it. Like this recent piece telling us that the county has collected only $374,700 in the past 11 months. It doesn't take much of a math whiz to calculate that at 50 cents per ticket, that the Ark has sold at most 750,000 tickets in that time. And this is well short of the 2 million visitor estimates originally made for year 2 of the Ark, and even the 1 million visitor revised numbers. 2 lawsuits alleging coercion with government agencies to use public funds for Ark tours, and encouraging public schools to try to find loopholes to organize field trips to the boat building.
Any public school group that wants to come to the Ark Encounter or the Creation Museum provides an official public school group as a field trip. The teachers and the students, totally free. We're not going to charge them anything. And we're doing that as an outreach to the public schools and to get them to be courageous and stand up against the bullies.
To that amusing time when the Ark Encounter had to sue its own insurance company because the attraction sustained, wait for it, flood damage.
Ark Encounter is suing its insurers over damage worth about $1 million caused by heavy rains.
Now you may wonder why a Canadian like myself is so singularly focused on an Australian who's inflicting pain to some Americans. Despite the obvious world of the internet age we live in, where bad ideas spread across the globe at the speed of Wi-Fi without consideration of borders or nations, it is much more personal and at home than that. It's not just the time I actually met Ken, and he accused me of being a troll who lives in his parents' basement. You see, in 2018, Ken Ham was invited to be the keynote speaker at the annual Provincial Homeschool Conference in the province where I live, Alberta, Canada. As an activist against the kind of science denial teaching that I myself believed for decades, putting me at a massive disadvantage at all things science, I couldn't leave his bid for the minds of my neighbor's children and a share of my tax dollars to go unprotested. I decided that my anonymity behind a cartoon wasn't as important as the harm Ken Ham was doing to my community, so I took to the airwaves.
Paul Enns runs a YouTube channel.
Paul Enns is a Calgary father of 3.
Joining me now is Paul Enns.
Of course the ideas are bad. A child taught to believe that the Earth is 6,000 years old must also necessarily be taught that science isn't to be trusted on any issues. Forget health warnings. Forget climate warnings. This is, in part, why some groups of Christians lead the way in putting our world in danger. And forget about these kids becoming scientists themselves. Who knows how many brilliant minds will never solve a problem that the world could use a solution to. But it's not only that. In my province of Alberta, the government funding that would normally go to a child's public school just goes to the religious school or the homeschool of the parent if they don't go. But the curriculum for these non-public school students is not controlled. The reason Ken Ham came to my province was so that my tax dollars could go towards buying Answers in Genesis material for thousands of students, as if it were actual science curriculum. And you may think, that's terrible for Canada's backwoods province, But what does it have to do with us in the U.S.A.? Well, just this month, the Supreme Court of the U.S. ruled in a Montana-based case that scholarship donations giving to religious private schools should receive tax credit. Now, this is not as bad as direct government funding of canned material, like happens in my province, but nevertheless, Answers in Genesis is celebrating.
Supreme Court strikes down state ban on taxpayer funding for religious schools. So this is actually a bit of good news, a good Supreme Court decision that was made recently.
And why shouldn't they? Despite the monstrous boat-shaped monument we protest today, the bulk of their money comes from the sales of quote-unquote educational material, including a strong push into curriculum.
I encourage you to order Answers Bible Curriculum for your church, Christian or homeschool. Learn more at answersbiblecurriculum.com.
Not only that, Answers in Genesis actually funds a private school in Kentucky, and their new Answer Center, built on the Ark Encounter grounds, houses a massive schoolroom complex for homeschool students to come on site and learn AIG-branded science. The pattern of Answers in Genesis is to continue to blur the boundaries of church-state separation, to find loopholes, to have your tax dollars subsidize their brainwashing of the next generation. On my YouTube channel, I've dedicated myself to combating the ideas of Answers in Genesis, but we're going to need everyone's help to combat their social, political, and economic impact. If you're in the tri-state area, contact the Tri-State Freethinkers to see how you can get into year-round. If not, find a group near you that advocates for church-state separation, and find out if your tax dollars might be going towards Answers in Genesis material, designed to teach the next generation that science is not to be trusted. If so, write your elected officials and let them know that The Flintstones is not a documentary. Over the years, it's been my great pleasure to cover previous Ark Encounter protests from afar. So it's a tremendous honor to be included today, though I obviously greatly wish that everyone could have been together for it again this year. I hope to join myself one of these years soon. But this one is dedicated to my friend Strike, who was together with you last year at the protest, one of his last trips before his untimely passing. I miss you, buddy. Until we're all together again, stay safe, take care of each other, and never stop the fight against poisonous ideas. Later.
Paul, thank you so much. Wow. So I'm going to level with you. That one wasn't live. But if you want to see what Paula G's content looks like, that's exactly what it looks like. And that was fantastic. Paul, thank you so much for submitting that. Our next speaker is someone who gives me a lot of hope. This person just had their Sweet 16, I believe, and they can correct me if I got that wrong, and just got a driver's license and is very excited about that. Here's the thing. At that young age, at 16, they've already done enough activist work that I still feel like I need to catch up. There are plenty of people who I consider peers. This person, I'm still a fan because they've got an entire life ahead of them. And as a speaker, I'm excited to see where they go. So I'm happy to introduce to you, Kelly Helton.
My name is Kelly Helton, and I'm the equal rights advocate for the Tri-State Freethinkers. And yes, you're right, Eric, I am 16. And Ken Ham opened the Ark Encounter in 2016 because he believed, quote, "Only Christianity and its teachings can explain the purpose and meaning of this world." Yeah. And he also claimed that Christianity is the basis for right and wrong, good and evil. However, his moral compass is based off of a religion that is filled with discrimination and indoctrinating young children into these immoral principles. The Ark Encounter is teaching anti-science and discriminatory ideas. They are attempting to con people into believing the Bible is some scientifically accurate system, and the real science is some phony belief. Isn't that a little backwards? But science isn't a belief. It's a systematically organized body of knowledge and research from reasonable conclusions. And honestly, anything written by old men with no input from women thousands of years ago should be highly questioned anyways. And education is extremely important, especially when we live in a world where people believe whatever they read off of a Facebook headline. Children should be taught critical thinking skills from a young age and not indoctrinated into religious. In school, I should not have been taught that our Constitution was founded on Moses and the Ten Commandments, or that evolution is just a choice to believe in. Instead, I should have been taught real evolution, and that it's a fact and a good theory, an accurate history of our world, the good and the bad. I should have been taught critical thinking skills and comprehensive sex education. That's what all students should be taught in public and in private schools. Students should be learning in an inclusive and comfortable environment where they're not afraid to speak up and ask questions. That is the education that students should be receiving. Nowadays, it is easy to look at something terrible on the news and forget about the next. People tend to only care about something for one day and only if it affects them. But there are some things that we cannot look away from. Hate, oppression, discrimination. These are things that we cannot turn our back on. Many people ask why we come out to the Ark every year. And the Ark Encounter is more than a biblical tourist attraction. It is a symbol of what is wrong with our country. The Ark received $18 million in state tax incentives while continuing discriminatory hiring. They received money from the PPP loan. They refused to hire anyone of the LGBT community or anyone who is not a creationist. And the list of the things that the Ark Encounter has done can keep going on and on. And this is a clear violation of the separation of religion and government, not to mention the fact that it's completely anti-science. Now, Bill Nye once said, "Science is the key to the future. And if you don't believe in science, then you're holding everyone else back." So the Ark Encounter is holding the city of Williamstown back. They're holding the state of Kentucky back. They're holding the entire United States back by allowing people to think it's okay to have religion in the government and promote anti-science. That is why we are here every year. Because from this protest, parents and students have reached out to the Tri-State Freethinkers about violations of religion and government in their schools and cities. Grant County schools in particular had 14 pages of violations. And with our help, we helped them receive every last one. So now their school community is more inclusive and educational. Cincinnati public schools now have medically and scientifically accurate sex education, kindergarten through 12th grade. This protest has led to an amazing change in our community, and change will continue to happen. The Ark Protest is more than just about protesting once a year. It's about bringing people together to inspire them to make change in their communities, to stand up and speak out against discrimination in any form, to promote science, and to ensure that we have a true separation of religion and government no matter where you live. Because each of us can make a difference. But together, we can make a change. Thank you.
Kelly, thank you so much, and a late happy birthday. That was fantastic. Whew. Okay, so our next speaker. This is an amazing lineup. First off, I'm just in awe that I get to present these people. This is fantastic. Anyway, moving on. Our next speaker has a channel called Holy Kool-Aid. If you haven't checked it out, you absolutely should subscribe. He's also a founding member of Faithless Forum, which I believe is one of the fastest growing atheist conventions there is. He is an online community builder and a really, really good friend. I'm happy to introduce Thomas Westbrook.
Hi, I'm Mandisa Thomas, founder and president of Black Nonbelievers Incorporated, which is headquartered in the Atlanta, Georgia area. It is an honor to join you today for the annual Ark.
Well, that looked like that was a bit of a flub. Let's try that again. I don't know what happened. I think we might have picked up earlier in the stream. Let's try that one more time. He's got a YouTube channel called Holy Kool-Aid. He's a founding board member of Faithless Forum. Thomas Westbrook.
Hello, everybody. I wasn't sure if I was hearing Mandisa's recording, and I don't think my mic was coming through, but part of that might have been my fault. To those of you who don't live in the Bible Belt, surrounded by the religious literalism, who see Kinham, the Creationism Museum, and the Ark Encounter as a collection of harmless, isolated loons who no one actually takes seriously, I'm here to share my story of how the nonsense, the pseudoscience, and the misinformation found its way into my classroom. You see, I was a missionary kid, but like many people who weren't missionary kids, I was also a homeschooled kid. And my curriculum was young earth creationist textbooks from places like A. Becca and Bob Jones, who preach the same stuff that you find from Answers in Genesis, that the earth is 6,000 years old, it's young, there was a literal flood that wiped out everything on the face of the earth except for one small couple, Noah and his wife and their 3 kids. And this story, it instilled in me this sense of a feeling that the most important thing was to follow God and to serve God, that this life was just a trial, it was just a practice run, that Jesus was coming back soon anyways. And the evidence that I was given to support it were things like the fact that there are fish fossils on mountaintops that are somehow proof of the flood, or that the fact that there are flood stories around the world are corroborating evidence that Noah's Ark actually took place. And somehow these tiny shreds of evidence that were isolated in and of themselves seemed like enough for me to not question the absurdity of a 500-year-old man and his 3 kids building the world's largest floating wooden zoo without power tools or steel reinforcement, big enough to house tens of thousands, if not millions of animal species, including dinosaurs, with enough room left over for a year's supply of food and fresh water. Now, when you start to add all of that together, it just gets worse. They're surrounded by millions of tons of poo. What do they do with the poo? They shovel it out the one window, which also happens to be their one light source, which is supposed to be the nutrition for all of the plants on board, because plants can't exactly live underwater for a year. They would have had to have brought termites, rats, flies, mosquitoes, and parasites on the Ark, but amazingly, no one in this incredibly unhygienic, cramped condition died of disease. And that's ignoring the fact that most carnivores' stomachs can't handle a vegetarian diet, so Noah couldn't have just brought 2 of every animal, because otherwise every brunch would have turned into a mass extinction event. Now, he would also have had to have had a giant aquarium on board for all of the fish, dolphins, sharks, and whales, because flooding Earth with thousands and hundreds of thousands and billions of tons of fresh rainwater to cover the mountaintops would have drastically altered the salt content, pressure, temperature, and pH level enough to kill all sea life. And after almost a year, how did Noah go out to search for land? Well, he sent a bird out to scout for land, and it returned with an olive branch, because somehow olive trees have gills. And the pairs of surviving animals that somehow made it through this horrible apocalypse would have had to trek across Apocalypse Earth with no plant food back to their natural habitats so that they can incest their way off the endangered species list. Meanwhile, there's no record in the fossil record, the geological record, or the genetic record for any of this. We have ice cores and trees that are older than the dates given for Noah's Ark. And we have multiple civilizations with human writing that date back before the time of the flood, who were thriving all the way through it. Coincidentally, none of them recorded being wiped off the face of the planet, and they kept building monuments which exist to this day. No sane, educated adult in their right mind would accept a literal interpretation of Genesis. And I'm just barely scratching the surface of the scientifically illiterate disaster that is the Noah's Ark mess, believed and spread by those at the Ark Encounter. But because adults don't buy it, they indoctrinate children with this crap. From before the age that they learn to reason, they build propaganda theme parks for kids to get them while they're young. But what about the fossil record on the fossils that are on top of mountaintops? Well, when you have tectonic plates that come together at a subduction zone, it causes one of them to go under and one of them to be pushed up over, slowly forming a mountain range. That's why Mount Everest is still growing over 2 inches a year. Science is freaking cool. Not when you have to dumb it down with some archaic interpretation of it. And as for the history, the historical record of these other flood stories around the world, yes, they do exist. But when you live near a body of water, your culture will experience flooding sometimes. For this reason, flood myths are actually a really common trope, just like all of the myths about virgin births that predate Jesus are common tropes. But Answers in Genesis will gloss over the fact that some of these stories refer to localized non-global floods and are often even more ridiculous than Noah's Ark, referring not to a boat, but to a large raft or a floating canoe. Now, it might be obvious to you that this is nonsense, but it's easy to brush it aside as just a bunch of loons that no one takes seriously. What is the actual harm that's caused by this? Well, for starters, there was harm caused personally, not just to me, but to kids all around the country who are robbed of a decent education, who have a chance to learn about how the world works and put things together and actually solve the biggest problems facing us by learning about evolution and learning about genetics and how mutations occur and how new genetic content can be added to a genome of a species. We can learn how disease works to protect us from things like the coronavirus. When we discount medicine, when we discount science, when we say that the experts are a bunch of conspiracy people who are spreading misinformation, spreading lies of the devil in order to be able to continue living a life of sin, then that kind of mistrust of experts, of people who spend their lives dedicated to this stuff, working in laboratories day in and day out to solve the biggest problems facing humanity, when we throw that all out the window, when we ignore it, then we end up with 130,000 dead. We end up with a pandemic with rates that are exploding out of control, with over 3 million people infected with a virus. We end up with problems that we're not willing to face because we assume that Jesus is coming quickly. We assume that we're given dominion over the earth so we don't have to worry about climate change. We take the Bible literally, and we take science as a bunch of chaff that just needs to be discarded or ignored whenever it contradicts with the biblical narrative. The Bible was an early, ancient attempt to figure the world out. It was okay to start with, but we've learned so much, and boy, have we learned a lot since then. If you're still getting all of your answers in Genesis, though, don't be surprised when you find yourself ill-equipped to deal with the real world.
All right. Oh, it looks like I didn't see that I was ready. I apologize for that. Hey, yeah, no, this is what happens when you have a live stream. There are a few little technical things, so thank you for hanging on with us. I sincerely appreciate it. Thomas, thank you so much for joining. If you haven't checked him out, you absolutely should. And again, the links to check out all of the speakers are in the description for this video. So please check them out. Speaking of, our next speaker, we are going to do our best to connect with them, but that just happens when you have a live broadcast. He is representing right there where the Ark is. He's the co-founder of Satanic Louisville and the Assistant State Director for Kentucky for American Atheists. Here is Dietrich von Doom.
Good afternoon, everybody. Again, my name is Dietrich von Doom. I'm State Director for American Atheists here in Kentucky. I am the co-founder and co-lead of Satanic Louisville. Yeah, looks like I'm having little technical issues, but I'm going to be very brief because the information that I have, I want you to be able to digest it. What I'm going to be talking about is actually going to touch on issues that No Illusion and Aaron, and I think everyone here has touched on, which is this growing theocracy that we're seeing, these attempts by Christian nationalists to inject their religion into the public forum. So what I'm going to tell you is I really want you to kind of hang in there, because it's a bit, and it's kind of wild. It may seem like a conspiracy theory, but we have the receipts. So what I'm talking to you about today is Project Blitz. Now, what is Project Blitz? Project Blitz is a concerted effort on the, it's a coalition rather, of Christian right groups. We have the Congressional Prayer Caucus Foundation, the National Legal Foundation, and the Wall Builders Pro-Family Legislatures Conference. Now, Project Blitz was founded by Randy Forbes. If you know who his name is, he was a former U.S. representative to Virginia. He served 2 terms, and he also was nominated to as the Secretary of the Navy twice under Trump. He was passed up. So you may know some of these names, but bear with me. Project Blitz, again, is a concerted effort on part of Christian nationalist groups to inject their religion in the public square. It seeks to, quote, protect the free exercise of traditional Judeo-Christian religious values and beliefs in the public square, and to reclaim and properly define the narrative which supports such beliefs. Now, they were founded around 2016, and they came into the public eye in 2017 through the introduction of certain bills. Now, what they're trying to do is sort of a frog in the pot approach to Christian nationalism. What they're trying to do is get as many lawmakers on their side in local, state, and federal governments to introduce certain legislation. Now, they're not aiming for legislation to take effect, to be voted. What they're trying to do is way more underhanded. What they want to do is flood state, local, and federal legislatures with as many bills that they know won't hold muster at all in court. But the key is to get these bills in court so that groups such as American Atheists, Americans United, every organization whose job it is to watch out for these bills and to fight them in court, because they know that our side, we have so much, our resources are limited. They know that what they can do is that once they get us in court, they drain our coffers, because their coffers are unlimited. They have millions of people who are donating to their churches, 10% of their life's earnings to churches. These churches also will donate to specific groups who then fund Project Blitz. It's unlimited. They have hundreds of lawyers at their disposal. And so what they want to do is get us to fight them in court in a sort of rope-a-dope sort of tactic. They want us to fail. They want us exhausted. They want us complacent. And they'll start off with things like, they want to start off with things like, "In God We Trust" bills. Here in Kentucky, we under Matt Bevin, we had our legislature enacted the "In God We Trust" bill that requires all public schools to prominently display the logo "In God We Trust." Now that went ahead and became law, was signed by Governor Matt Bevin, and school systems around complied in various ways. Now, the key thing about that is that we do have people who are sympathetic. We do have educators who know the importance of separation of church and state. And so what will happen in, let's say, Fayette County, Kentucky, they framed a dollar bill with the "In God We Trust" facing, which absolutely complied with that law. Here in Jefferson County, Kentucky, what the JCPS superintendents did was frame a brief history of the term "In God We Trust." And because it included the words "In God We Trust," it passed. And so that showed that there are people who are still sympathetic, and also super pissed off the Christian or the Christian evangelicals who want us all to comply with their religion. Now, when that took place, myself and Brittany Pike, who is the wife of our state director, Johnny Pike, we went on to local media and made it known that, hey, we are watching this. If you have children in schools in Kentucky and you know that your rights are being violated, by all means, reach out to us. Myself, Johnny Pike, anyone within American Atheists. On top of that, more and more legislations have been introduced as times passed. It started in 2016. There were 4 bills passed throughout the country. 2017, there were 200 proposed in 42 states in Congress. 31 passed in 17 states. In 2018, 300 were proposed in 32 states in Congress. 33 passed in 16 states. So they're ramping up. They know what they're doing. And again, they're starting off with bills like In God We Trust, but what they're working towards are bills such as limiting who is able to adopt children in various states. There are laws that are proposed and have passed in certain states that restrict non-believers or believers in other religions from adopting. We have hundreds and thousands of children in foster care, in adoption, who need good homes, loving homes. And because because there are people who are either LGBTQ or non-believers or Hindu, or in the, if I'm not mistaken, it was South Carolina, Jewish parents were restricted from adoption because of their religion or non-religion, or their non-compliance with Christian nationalist ideology. That hurts no one but the children, and it hurts the parents who just want to take care of them. And not on top of that, they want to ramp up to religious exemption bills. They want doctors to be able to restrict life-saving treatment and from individuals that don't fit their particular religious interpretations. So the bills that are popping up around that says that doctors can not treat trans people, or not treat non-believers, or not provide reproductive health care to women. That's all part of Project Blitz. And I know that it sounds crazy, but it's absolutely true. As a matter of fact, you can go to blitzwatch.org and you can actually see the playbook. They have a literal playbook that they've written, they distribute out to sympathetic lawmakers. They have template bills that's how we're able to track them, actually, because you can read each bill and they line up word for word, line for line, and it's a cookie cutter approach. You can put whatever you want into these bills, put them in the legislature, and get them passed. Not only that, but there's also future proposals that was found out. So many of the people that are aligned are such as David Barton. He's one of the chairs of Project Blitz. David Barton is a white nationalist. David Barton doesn't believe in interracial marriage. And there are people like him who want to frame Project Blitz legislation to not only restrict marriage for LGBTQ individuals, but also people who don't share the same race. They want to be able to restrict the lives of American citizens in order to enact their own Christian dominionist theocracy. So again, if you're watching this, by all means, go to blitzwatch.org. Learn as much as you can. And there is a bill tracker that finds whatever state you are, what bills have been enacted or been proposed by legislatures who are sympathetic to Project Blitz. Here in Kentucky, there have been 2 bills that have been proposed this year alone. right behind the other in February and in March. Now, those are both failed in committee, but they are both religious refusal bills that would allow doctors to refuse to treat in any capacity, whether it's in regular appointments or emergency room visits. So as a Kentuckian, I am happy to see that those bills have failed, because we do have legislative members who understand the importance of separation of church and state. So what we need to do is to be vigilant. We need to vote. We need to invest time in finding out what positions those candidates hold. We recently elected Adi Bashir, who has been on the side of true religious freedom. But we also elected an AG who sides wholeheartedly against abortion access, against separation of church and state. So we must be vigilant. We must pay attention to what we're doing when we're pulling the lever in the ballots, in the polls. So, in closing, what is Project Blitz? Project Blitz is a real-life conspiracy. Make no doubt about it. It's a clandestine plot hatched behind locked doors in a smoky room to bring about Christian dominionist theocracy at the expense of our very lives and rights. Now, as Benjamin Franklin once said, we must hang together or we will hang separately. Make no doubt about it. They are on the move. We must be vigilant. Thank you very much. Hail all of you.
Thank you so much. That's fantastic. And yeah, we have a lot of work. It's wonderful to hear that and really recognize that we just have so much more ahead of us. And for those of you watching, you have work too. So this was done live, but what we are gaining today is the fact that we're doing this online. This is out, and this means that we can spread this way more than we could in person. So if you're watching this, share it out, like, and subscribe to Tri-State Freethinkers, because they're doing incredible work and they could use your support. That said, there are a lot of people who worked really, really hard to make this happen. Greg James has been producing this, and he and Katie Stewart have been in contact with the speakers to make sure that everyone is ready to go, and this wouldn't have happened without them. This is all volunteer work. Everyone here, no one here is making any money. Everyone here is a volunteer. Thank you. From the bottom of our hearts, thank you. Best name ever and Inquisitive Quandary, who are modding the live chat right now. Thank you. Mandisa, Aaron, Noah, V, Paul, Kelly, Thomas, Dietrich, thank you. It's so important that we have voices in the movement who are willing to stand up and say, hey, you know what? It's been 5 years and we're still here. It's been 5 years since the Ark Encounter opened, and we're still going to hold their feet to the fire. In 5 years, we've grown to this. And if they're still there in 5 years from now, we'll be there too. I want to say thank you to Chrissy Helton, David Brenner, and the other board members for Tri-State Freethinkers for reaching out and asking me to MC this. I realized I'd never introduced myself. I'm Eric Murphy. I'm host of Talk Heathen with the ACA, and I'm also host of Murphy's Law on my own channel. Thank you so much for joining us today. We will be here next year. We hope to be there in person, and we hope to see you there. Take care, everyone.